4-4, this is 7, stand by a minute. Just come on, what is your attack angle?
Okay, talk to him, see what that did. Charlie Horse, San Diego.
2-4, traffic 275.
85 just made a pass in there. Can you give us any?
Go to 2-1, 77.
Standing by, over.
Okay, I'll put it a little closer than those trees. Let me come around with a Lao 3 and I'll put it on those trees there.
Roger that, Lao 3.
So, Mr. Jack, how did you, where'd you grow up and everything, and then how did you get into the Air Force?
I grew up on a cotton farm in West Texas, and my mother saw that I liked to read as a young kid, and so she made sure I had books to read. And I found out that I enjoyed reading books about World War II, about fighter pilots of World War II. And I came across a book called God is My Co-Pilot by Robert Scott. And that set me on the path to which I never varied from then on out.
Wow.
I knew what I was going to do, and I knew that I had to go to college to be able to do it. And so I went to college and graduated in ROTC and went into the Air Force into pilot training and graduated pilot training. And just like this guy, but I graduated before Vietnam started. But like this guy, my graduating class selections were crap. At the best that I could put them. I was fourth in my class, and I took a T-29, I think the civilian model of it is a Convair 440. Is a same is an airliner like Trans Texas Airlines was flying at the time in Sacramento, California. And I was a young lieutenant, a bunch of old captains, and they kind of treated me like a pet because they hadn't had a lieutenant in so long. And they did everything for me. And before long, within a year, I was an instructor pilot out of pilot training. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And anyway, I was active in the Aero Club there, flying a T-34 as an acrobatic instructor. I taught flying, and they had a Cub, J3 Cub. I taught flying in a J3 Cub. I did everything I could do to get flying time in different kinds of airplanes. And air commandos were posted as needing people. And so I applied, and I was turned down because I didn't have the qualifications. I was crushed. And in the next couple of days, they posted a general's aide job, and I applied for that. I got the damn thing. And I was least likely to have the personality for a general's aide, but I did okay. He was a brigadier general, he was a little guy, I liked him a lot. But there's one lovely thing about that job. I got to fly 3 different airplanes. Had a T-33, had a U-3 Blue Canoe, a Cessna
310?
Yeah, Cessna 310, and C-47. And because he was a general, I was an IP. They just patted me on the head and made me an IP.
Great.
The general didn't ever fly in the front seat of the T-bird, but we went all over the country in one of those 3 airplanes. And I got a lot of great flying time while I was with him. The reason I took the job is I was under the impression that he could get me any flying job that I wanted when I left that assignment. Well, it come up his retirement time. What do you want to do there, Jack? Well, I want to go to fighters. Okay, let me see what I can do. Well, he got me an assignment to RF 101s. Voodoos. And so I go to South Carolina to learn how to fly the Voodoo, and my assignment was to Okinawa. Vietnam is kicking up now about this time, and so I go to Kadena, Okinawa, where my squadron is to be, and there's not a Voodoo on the base. They're all in Vietnam. And they decide that with my young experience, I could not fly the Voodoo in combat. Well, hell, what am I going to do now? So I was sent to another base on Okinawa, Naha, to fly the C-130. And that's how I got into the C-130. I flew a tour in the C-130. As I said in my little talk, I learned a lot about flying on C-130. Man, we hauled from beans to bullets, a couple of elephants, a road grader or two, lots of bodies. But it was not a pleasant assignment because you're always tired, you're always dirty. Our building was not good.
Now,
But,
how was your billeting?
we had a house in downtown Saigon, but getting back and forth was the problem. You had to catch a bus. The bus was never there. You had to wait on the damn thing. So you work all day and then you wait 2 hours for the bus, and you get there, and the house was not air conditioned, and so you'd stick to the sheets and you'd turn over, the sheets would turn over with you and all that stuff. I was always glad to go to work there, but it was a learning curve for me every day. I got to do things with that airplane I never knew that I would get to do with airplanes. I got put on a mission of going and getting broke airplanes and bringing them back to where they fixed airplanes. And so I'd go out and there'd be an airplane with an engine out, so you make 3 engine takeoff and bring it back. Or you'd go out and you'd have one engine out, one engine that with a starter broke, and 2 engines that would work. You'd have to do what's called a windmill taxi start on the broke engine, where you'd bring it out you'd start like you're going to make a takeoff. You'd bring it out of idle, out of feather, gradually, and make it slowly turn. Maybe you get it fired up. With busted tires, just anything would be wrong with it when you went to get them. But I enjoyed that.
Did you do a lot of that here in the United States, that you were picking up broken airplanes, or was that aircraft out of the country?
It was always, they were in the country. And then I got put on a mission, it's called a blind vet mission, where we flew, we initially flew over North Vietnam looking for trucks at night. And we had yellowbirds and redbirds, B-57s. We were trying to find trucks for them to bomb. And we got pushed out of North Vietnam because they brought in SAMs, and we didn't have any SAM warning stuff. So then we moved over to Laos, and I went up and down the breadth of Laos. We were from top to bottom on Laos, and I got to know the country pretty well. Only seeing about three miles under a flare each time, but you could get to where you could see a lot that way.
And this was still truck hunting.
Yeah, hunting for trucks. And then I got to where I wanted to kill trucks, not just drop flares on them. and the T-28s, AT-28 started coming in up at NKP, and I go up to NKP and meet Heine Ederholt, Colonel Ederholt, and said, "Sir, here's my qualifications, and I can be the best truck killer you could have."
What year was that? Do you remember?
Yes, sir. That was 1967. And he said, "Okay, I'll get you here." And damned if he didn't do it. Within a couple of weeks, I had orders to come back to the States to check out the AT-28 and then go back over there and go after trucks. And I loved hunting them trucks. It was kind of like being on the cotton farm. Man, we're going to go find them weeds and get them out of there. We flew about 30 missions a month there. And I really had a lot of success at it. And I enjoyed that mission a lot. But on our poor little AT-28s, the engines started coming apart on us. Had a couple of guys had to jump out of them because the engines quit.
What model was it?
The AT-28 D-5s. It was 1820-86Ws was the engine in them. And we were just over boosting them out there in combat was what it was. And so they said, "Oh, okay, we're gonna transition you to A-1s." So in come a couple of A-1s. We already had A-1s there. They didn't fly at night. They were on a day mission guys. But they rolled up a couple of E-models, fat faces, and I got my first Skyraider ride at NKP. I got 2 rides in the fat face, the 2-seat model, and then I got 1 flight in a single-seat model, and I was about ready to go to combat in a Skyraider when they said, "Hey, Jack, we got this new deal for you. We want you to go to Laos and fly with the Laos and AT-28 squadrons." And so I did. I had 2 squadrons, Savannah Cat and Pox A. And I'd work with the Savannah Cat squadron Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Wednesday afternoon, I'd go to Pox A, and I'd work Thursday, Wednesday afternoon, Thursday, and Friday with the Pox A squadron. They didn't fly on the weekends, and that was good for me. The Laotian assignment was interesting. First thing they said was, "Don't bring any uniforms. You got to go downtown and have one of those safari suits made that he was talking about. In fact, you ought to have 3 or 4 made so you can have something to wash." So I did that. And they said, you can't call anybody above their rank. There were some American enlisted guys over there. They couldn't call you by the rank. They call you Mr. That's why that's Mr. on there. It's kind of
That's good.
Yes, making fun. Anyway, and nobody ever said anything about hair or anything like that. So, I had a mustache that really got out of control. Lao barbers sat on the side of the road and they had them little hand clippers, and I didn't want them anywhere close to me. But I enjoyed working with the little guys. I flew as number 4. When it allows me to go fly, I'd fly as number 4. And all I had to say was 4 in Laos. 1, 2, 3, 4. Off we'd go, drop bombs, and come back home. My job was to make sure they were doing tactically sound things make sure that they had the support they needed on the ground, those kinds of things. It was a good job. Interesting thing, they had a real old T-28D model. It was an early model. It wasn't standard with the rest of them. Switches were different and all that stuff in different places. And the Laos wouldn't fly it. So, well, it didn't have good P. If something didn't have good P, you didn't have anything to do with it, right?
That's right.
Anyway, that airplane didn't have good P because it had switches in the wrong place and all that jazz. So they wouldn't fly it. So I just used it as my transport going back and forth between Paksay and Savannah. Had a terrible radio in it, but it didn't make a difference because there was nobody to talk to anyway. But I drove that old airplane lots of hours just driving, going back and forth. That's enough. I'll stop there.
Yeah, how many tours did you have out of the country, when you were serving? You were in Laos?
A total of 48 months.
48 months.
I will say that one thing while I was in Laos, there was a group of intrepid airmen there, Americans, whose call sign was Raven. They were forward air controllers. They're unsung heroes, quite frankly. There were never more than 20 Ravens in country at any one time, and they kept two North Vietnamese divisions stymied around the Plains of Jars for, well, from 67 through 72. 20 guys did that.
You want to back up a minute? I know you were talking about that you had to go to college. Did you tell us where you went?
Do what?
Did
Where you
tell
go
us
to college?
Where you went to college?
Where'd you go to college?
Where did you go to college?
I went to college, I went to college at Tarleton State College. It was a 2-year school then.
Yes, sir.
And it was supposed to be a feeder school for A&M, so I went to A&M from there. But I got married during that summer. When we got to College Station, my wife couldn't find a job, and we were starving to death. And so after the first semester there, we got in our car and went looking for another college.
Tell the truth, you just didn't want to be an Aggie, did you?
Well, actually, I knew I was going to be in the military, and I was in the ROTC there, and they, by God, knew how to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
So I enjoyed being in ROTC at A&M, but we just couldn't stay there. We drove to Austin in the corner of 6th and Congress and bought a newspaper, and there were 5 jobs only listed. We threw the newspaper away and drove to Lubbock. And my wife got a job the next day, and that's where I graduated from college.
That's great.
Wow.
Real quick, where and when, where all were you stationed and when, if you remember? Where were you stationed, and do you remember the dates you were stationed in each location when you were in the Air Force? Again, we're looking for details here.
I was stationed at what is the name of that base in Sacramento that closed? Sac base.
Starts with a C. I don't know.
Anyway, I was stationed. I went to pilot training, basic pilot training in Bartow, Florida. That would be in 1960. I went to advanced pilot training in Laredo, Texas. Graduated in '61. I went to Sacramento, California. Can't remember the name of the base. It wasn't McClellan. It was the other base, which it doesn't exist anymore. I stayed there 2 years, so I would have left there in, I guess, 63. I went to Marietta, Georgia. It was stationed on the field where the Lockheed plant is, whatever the name of that base is. I forgot it. I stayed there with the general for, 63, 65. I went off to school and wound up in Okinawa, and in late 65 at Kadena, and they didn't want me, and they sent me to Naha, and they wanted me, and that's where I flew the C-130s, but it was all in Vietnam. And I left there in 67 and went to NKP. Left NKP in 68 and went to Laos. Came out of Laos in later in 68, and came home to Herbert Field in Florida, working for General Ironholt. And that's where I flew the combat applications group and weapons test and all that, and Skyraider and other airplanes. I left in 68. In 70, I moved over to Herbert Field and flying A-37s and Dick Secord Squadron, ops officer of his squadron. And did that through 71. 71, I went to Florida State and got my MBA. And come out of there in 72, and lo and by God behold, they put me back in a flying job, and I couldn't believe it. I thought this slip had gone in the wrong slot, because I sure was surprised. I went to England Air Force Base in Louisiana, flying A-37s, ops officer of the 8th SOS. Did that for 2 years, and the wings started converting to A-7s, and I started flying the A-7, and left there in early 75 and went to Armed Forces Staff College in Norfolk, Virginia. And which is kind of a neat deal. It's a joint college, there's CIA people there and all that other stuff. And I was glad to be selected to go, because I knew it pretty much guaranteed me lieutenant colonel by being selected for that school. And funny story about it, towards the end of the school, I hadn't got an assignment yet, and I was wondering about my assignment, and it was guaranteed, you're going to go to the by God, the Pentagon, okay? And I'd rather cut my toe off than go to the Pentagon, but it's something you got to do, so okay, I'll do it. And about 11 o'clock at night, my phone rang. Hello. And it's Honey Adderholt. Drummond, you got an assignment yet? What? No, sir, I don't. Well, I'm sorry. Would you like an assignment? Well, yeah. He said, I got a classified assignment I need a volunteer for. I said, a classified assignment you need a volunteer for. I tried to pick his brain a little bit about what it was about. He wouldn't tell me nothing. Nothing. He'd say, it's classified. Classified. It's classified. I said, General, would it involve the starting of an 1820? That's the engine in the T-28. He said, it might. I said, no, would it? He said, yes. I said, I'll take the job.
What year was that?
Huh?
What year?
That was 1974, 5. It's right on the border. And so that's when I went to Thailand to work on his Cambodian team. And that's what put me where I was on the airplanes and all that other stuff. I come back from there in 76, went to the Pentagon. And when I went to the Pentagon, Southeast Asia was really falling on its butt. I was among the last guys to come out of Southeast Asia. I was in a group. I was recruited to go into it. This general, I remember his name now, his name is Wilson, 2-star general. He came through Bangkok when I was there working for Heine. He said, will you come work for me in the Pentagon? I said, well, tell me what I would do. He said, I work in plans and ops. We're the hot outfit. Everybody that wants to make general works there. Every hotshot staff officer in the Air Force works in plans and ops. Will you come work for me? Well, I'd always wanted to know if I was as good as all those fellows, so I thought I'd give it a try. So I told them I would. When I got there, Southeast Asia's falling on its butt, and so they made me the project officer for Southeast Asia. And I negotiated the close down of the bases in the Philippines and bases in Thailand and all of that. But I was sitting there one day and they handed me a letter and said, here, take action on this. And it was a letter from the Prime Minister of Singapore to the President of the United States of America. And it said, basically, dear sir, we've been using Brits as advisor, and we don't think we're getting good Brits anymore. We'd like to know if you'd allow us to use Americans. And so the upshot of that letter is I wound up making 2 or 3 trips to Singapore, and we wound up negotiating I negotiated an agreement of a 5-person team would go into Singapore, not as advisors, but as to write a strategic plan for the Singapore Air Force. And I'd got to know in these trips, I'd got to know the Minister of Defense of Singapore pretty well. He'd elderly Chinese gentleman, elderly to me, he was about 65 probably, a little frail. But he took to me. And on my last night in Singapore, after we negotiated agreements and all that other stuff, they took me out to dinner. And, a table about this size and about 10 people around it, and there's more food on it than 20 people could eat. And they were saying, try this and try that and all that other stuff. And his name is Go, Dr. Go. Dr. Go was sitting right here. And we were talking during the night. He turned to me and he said, well, Colonel Drummond, will you be, I was Lieutenant Colonel by this time. He said, Colonel Drummond, will you be coming on the team? And I said, no, sir, I'm sure that I will not be. He said, why is that? And I said, well, sir, the sentence to the Pentagon is 4 years, and I've only served 2. And I've never known them to parole anyone. So I got 2 more years to serve. I won't be on the team. He said, oh, okay, I see. He said, would you take this back with you when you go? And he handed me an envelope. I opened it up, looked at it, and it was a check for $48 million. I said, yes, sir, sure. He's paying for airplanes or missiles or something. I don't know what he's paying for. I had taken a couple of weeks leave while I was on this trip to visit friends. And so it was 2 weeks later before I got back to work, and I walk in on Monday morning, and my boss, 2-star Wilson, met me at the door, and he allowed his hound that I was in a world of deep kimchi. And I didn't know what he was talking about. But he was telling me that I had to go see the Chief of Staff of the Air Force because of what I had done. And I was trying to figure out what I was doing. I was thinking to myself, surely they're not upset because I took leave and wandered around over there for a while. Surely they're not upset about that. Well, no, it turns out he hands me a letter. And the letter is from the Prime Minister of Singapore to the President of the United States of America, requesting that Lieutenant Colonel Jack Drummond be named head of the team coming to Singapore. And that was, of course, the first time I had heard of that. 2-star Wilson didn't believe that 1 second. And the working premise was that I had pushed that under the table to the Singaporeans, and they had done it. And they were higher level folks that were really hacked at me that morning. And the only way I got it stopped is I picked up the phone. The liaison in Singapore that I'd been talking to all the time, a little guy by the name of Tommy Lee, he's a civilian aide to Dr. Go. And I called Tommy Lee and got his butt out of bed. And I said, Tommy, here's what happened. And I know you know what happened, but I don't know what happened. And you got to straighten these guys out. So he told them, well, yeah, Dr. Go wants Colonel Drummond to lead the team. So he figured if the Prime Minister wrote a letter to the President, that would make it work. And it did. And I went to Singapore for 3 years.
Can I stop you and ask you, what happened to the check?
That's what I was going to ask.
Oh,
Well, he got a new car.
Okay.
I
I was going to say he was on leave for 3 weeks. I'm like, well, did you blow all of it?
oh no, I just kept it in my suitcase for that. I didn't have anything else to do with it.
Yeah, I love it.
I thought that's why they were upset at you, because you didn't get them the money fast enough.
Anyway, I spent 3 years in Singapore, and it was a wonderful assignment.
That's great.
I lived in the most unusual house. Tommy, as we're getting ready to move over there, he said, where do you want to live? I said, I'd like to live in one of those British colonial homes. He said, oh, no, you don't want to live in one of those. I said, yeah, I think I do. No, you don't. You really don't. You don't want to live in one of those. I said, well, okay, Tommy, whatever you say. He said, I can get you in a brand new condo on a 60th floor of a penthouse down. I said, Tommy, whatever. So we show up at the airport. Tommy meets us. He takes us to our house, which is a British colonial home. And it sat on top of, next to the highest hill in Singapore. It was about 500 feet high. Highest hill was 600 feet. It's right up in the middle of the embassy section where all the ambassadors lived and all that other stuff. House made out of concrete. It's 12 inches thick. No glass in the windows downstairs. I asked Tommy about that. He said, we don't have any bugs. I don't need glass. Oh, okay, that's new deal for me. That's like, you know, I'd already learned how to swim with other folks, being up in Laos and all that. So that's okay. I can handle that. It's huge. As you walk in the front door, to the left was a dining room, and the table seated 12. But that's not all. It also had 3 places where you put dishes. What do you call them? Not armoires.
China cabinet.
China cabinets against the wall. You know, so that I have no idea now how big the room was, but it was huge. To the right was a living room, same size, and that was all their rooms and downstairs. You go upstairs, there's 2 bedrooms, same size, but they were enclosed and they had window air conditioners, thank God. But I enjoyed living there very much.
So that was 3 years. That would take you to about 78.
Yeah,
that right?
that's right. And so, it takes me to 79. I come back to the States. Ever since I'd been in Laos, I'd hated the Air Force because they had bureaucratic, rear echelon dudes are always racking you up when they didn't have to and stuff. And there was a job at Bergstrom Air Force Base in Austin that I wanted. And I asked to be sent to that job when I came back. No, they sent me to the same job, but it was in Columbia, South Carolina. And so I said, you know, I don't have to do this anymore. I had to serve 1 more year because I was coming back from overseas, and I put in my retirement papers and quit.
And that was 1970?
I quit in 1980.
1980. Got it. Now, back to Sacramento. Was that base called Mather?
Mather.
Mather? I looked it up while we were talking. So, all right. We're gonna. We were covered, and let's go back to the story of the stolen aircraft and get you to basically run through that again in as much detail as you would like, and then we'll let you and Roger settle up who owes whoever the most, and we'll get that on camera too, because I imagine one of you owes the other one. And so, but if we could go through that story again about the Skyraiders.
Well,
General Adderholt sending you there.
You know what really didn't get told out there in the presentations was
and it'll be okay to start from the beginning and just include that part too.
Well, the beginning was that there's 11 Skyraiders sitting at Utapau.
You in the choppy eye bar.
It's really kind of interesting, by the way, dealing with Adderholt at the bar. Because he literally, this is the bar, I'd belly up here. He owned this end of the bar down here. This is where they took out drinks down here. But you belly up and you look at him, and if he said there was no place to get a number, but you had to get in the queue, and there'd probably be 6 or 7 in the queue, because he believed in flat organization. He didn't like vertical stuff. Anyway, you knew that you had work coming. He said, we got to give those 11 Skyraiders to the ties. You know, General, That's not a good deal for the Thais. They're not going to have any spares. There's not enough airplanes for a squadron. There's no training airplanes for them. It's just really not a good deal. Well, I want to do it. Why? And he had when he reached the end of his explanation, he looked over his glasses like this. And that was the end of it. You didn't continue anymore. He looked over his glasses. That's when I got into the business of the currency. I don't know that he had even thought about currency. He probably hadn't.
He didn't care.
But, you know, the thing about Adderholt that I loved about him, and the reason I loved working for him, is once he trusted you. He trusted you. He told you what to do, and he went and done other things. He didn't screw with you anymore. He expected, if you had problems, to come get him. But if you weren't having problems, just keep on doing it. Don't bother him. Fly those airplanes. I'm walking back to my apartment, about a block. I got to really think if Roger is the kind of guy that would disregard regulations, his own safety, common sense maybe, just to get to fly an airplane. And by the time I got to my apartment, I came to the conclusion that he was. And when I asked him, I had no doubt. Roger, would you like to fly A-1s? You bet your ass.
Yep.
I guess go back just a little bit. How did y'all first meet? When did you first?
We first met in my Cambodian job.
In what year?
It was shortly before this.
69, 70.
No.
2 or 3 months.
So
2 or
74,
Late 74, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe 74. Could have even been early 75, but
Yeah, January.
certainly late, no earlier than late 74. They got those side firing airplanes for the Cambodian Air Force, and I had not seen them. And since I was responsible for operations of the Cambodian Air Force, I felt that I ought to at least see the airplanes. And so I asked General Adderholt where they were, and he gave me Roger's a point of contact, and I called Roger and asked him to bring one down to Bangkok and give me a couple of flights in it so I'd see how it worked and how it looked and all that other stuff. And so that's how I met Roger, is he brought the airplane down to fly me around and show me about the airplane. And so
you first met him, what year again?
74 or 75.
late 74, early
Okay, so just
75.
a few months prior to y'all.
Just a few months prior. And as all pilots do, while we're flying around, you're shooting the breeze, where you been, what you flew. Yeah. Oh, you flew A-1. No, I did too. No kidding. You know, it's kind of that level. But the story about when we got out to the airplanes, we had a good plan. We were going to be as we were being as judicious as possible about flying those airplanes. We're going to get in our E-model, and we're going to use checklists, and we're going to fly around a traffic pattern, and we're going to do a couple of touch and goes, and we're going to check ourselves out, and then we're going to go fly. And Charlie Day said, there ain't no checklist.
He's just right. Ain't no checklist.
No checklist, huh? No, sir. Not a one. You know, we climb up on the wing of that E-model and it don't have a right seat in it or a stick. And I know that Roger's a good pilot, but I'm not going to sit on the floor while he flies it. And I didn't expect him to either. Wouldn't even ask him. And so all of our judicious planning went down the drain. Okay, so let's talk about flying them. Let's talk our way through the flight. And we talked about starting procedures. Actually, what we were doing is building a checklist. And I have to tell you that I was flying a AT-28 at the time, and the AT-28 and the Skyraider were not that dissimilar about cockpit procedures and all that. Different settings on the throttle and the prop, but basically same procedures, with one little difference. Anyway, we pulled them out. I don't remember how we figured out who was going to fly the single seat and who was going to fly the that face.
Major over captain, how'd that sound?
I think it was because I was a major and he was a captain. But anyway, I got in that airplane's 332, and A-1 and A-37 and AT-28, the fuel, when you turn on the fuel, it's the same handle in both airplanes. Right there, you turn it on. However, in the T-28, when you turn it on, it turns on the fuel boost pump. And the Skyraider, it doesn't. There's a boost pump right ahead of the switch. Well, I didn't think of that, and I missed that switch. Everything else worked. And to start turning that prop through. 16 blades, go to prominent, go to prominent, go to prominent, go to prominent. It don't fire one time. Go to prominent, go to prominent, go to prominent. It don't fire. Oh, I'm thinking, and now the battery is starting to get weak, and I look down there and I said, oh yeah, fuel boost pump. And I reached down there and turned that thing on. And it put a bunch of fuel in there, and I'd already primed it, and it fired. It did not backfire, but it fired. And Charlie Day said that flame come out the exhaust stacks, went past the tail. I said, I didn't see you run. And he said, well, there wasn't nowhere to go. Anyway, we got it fired up. And we had discussed about flaps. We didn't know about flaps. Did have flaps on takeoff? Yes, no. So we decided we'd use half flaps. So it taxed it out. I don't know if you noticed, but if you go out there and look, the rudder on the fat face, the two-place one, is about twice the size of the single-place airplane. Well, I start rolling down the runway, and the tail comes up before I got rudder authority. And I have to work really hard to keep it on a straight line. I pull the flaps up, and now I got rudder authority. And that's when I told him on the radio, no flaps on takeoff. Well, what happened was, you use half flaps when you got a full ordnance load, and we'd flown it that way most of the time, both of us, and we didn't remember how to fly it without an ordnance load on it. I don't remember much about going en route or anything like that. I do remember coming down initial with the 2 airplanes, and how proud I was that Roger was tucking it in really tight for not having been in an airplane for 3 years. His formation skills are coming back.
And how many years had it been for you?
6. But I wasn't flying formation. That's the reason I was formation lead. I didn't have to show my lack of proficiency. But that first flight was a real highlight for me. It tested every piloting skill that I'd ever had.
And details of that first landing?
No, the Skyraider is pretty easy to land.
Right. I meant the landing of that one that had been in the water.
No, that didn't make a difference. I learned how to fly in a Piper Cub, and my instructor at Piper Cub told me, he said, try to make touch the tail wheel first, and you'll never have a ground loop. And I used that on every tail dragger I ever flew, including the Skyraider. And landings were a piece of cake.
I guess what I was trying to get at was the concern about whether or not the brakes were going to work.
I didn't have that concern. Roger did. I didn't. We pretty well tested the brakes on a taxi out, quite frankly. That's how you steered it.
And y'all went to Utapau in C-12s, is that right? Or, okay, how'd you get there?
I don't remember how we got there.
I don't either, but I don't think it was in a. Well, it might have been. We might have left Don Mong in a C-12 and went down there, and you had these 2 T-28 harnesses.
That C-12 was kind of like my puppy dog, and I'd been moving all those other airplanes off the roads and stuff. He'd been following me. He'd take me out to the airplanes, and then go get me wherever I took the airplanes.
C-12 is a King Air, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was. Theirs was a little King Air.
Yeah.
Any funny stories you remember from your time?
Oh, normally I'd remember a lot, but I don't remember one now.
I would like you to tell us the story about that SAC officer that drove up in the staff car.
Oh, that was funny. That was funnier than Roger told it.
Yeah, it really was.
And was that on the second time y'all went back?
Yeah, we were getting ready to fly.
Get ready to go get the second one.
We were getting ready to mount up to fly the second time. This guy's name was Austin. His full colonel, his SAC full colonel, and he started relying on me pretty hard, and I don't know why, except I always had an answer for all his problems. And he was faced with stuff that wasn't in regs, so he didn't know how to do it. And the first deal was there was a C-47 that the gear had collapsed on, and he said, "What do you?" And I said, "Charlie," talking to Charlie Day, I said, "Charlie, why don't you and grab a couple of his guys and go get some." Those balloon things and raise that thing up and put that gear down so I can move that airplane. He said, "Okay, mate." And off they went. They did it. It took about 30 minutes. Well, Colonel Austin was just thrilled to death. And so he's always coming by talking to me every time I was out there with the refugees or whatever. And he was in charge, by the way. He had to billet all the Cambodian refugees, and then I had to billet all the Vietnamese refugees when they started coming in. So his plate was full. Anyway, we were about to mount up and take our second flight. Here he come driving his car and waving his hand. He jumped out. He said, PACAF, which is the higher headquarters, PACAF wants to know when is the date of your last landing in A-1s. Roger and I just looked at each other and said, yesterday? Okay. He wrote that down, got to his car, and drove off. Just like he had forded a large river or something, I don't know.
Yeah, that is great. That is great.
I guess for the camera, can you describe, I guess, kind of the scenario of where you were, or both of y'all were leading up to General Adderholt asking y'all to so-called steal the first
Do what?
first time. I guess describe the scenario as far as what's happening at the time General Adderholt asked you.
What led up to the Adderholt ordering you to go get the planes, and where were both of you at the time?
You were working for him and met him in the bar, and Cambodia had fallen, and he had successfully pulled that off because the ambassador listened to him. And so when Adderholt decided he wanted to give the A-1s to the Thais, he met him at the end of the bar and next on the list and said, give the A-1s to the Thais. And the story you told a while ago.
You see, we'd already given those 4 A-37s, 2 U-17s, and maybe an O-1 that I can't remember.
2 F-5s too.
And lots of Huey helicopters. We'd given all of those to the Thais. So it wasn't, I wasn't shocked that he was going to give more airplanes to the Thais, because what he was trying to do was make the Thai military happy, so that they could tamp down the unrest in their own government about all the stuff that was going on. So the Thai military could say, hey, look, guys, we're getting good stuff out of this. But I didn't see that getting A-1s was going to be good stuff, because it wasn't going to be enough of them and that sort of stuff. But that was the background of it. We'd been giving airplanes to the Thais for since the 30th of April, and this is about 2nd or 3rd of May when he told me to give these to the Thais.
Of the 11 planes that were in Utapao, 4 were capable of being flown out. Is that right?
No, only 4 were flown out.
Okay.
After we flew the second morning, when we got back to Utapao, I had a message from General Adderholt said, stop, don't fly anymore. I never found out why, but I'm going to guess why, is that somebody higher up in the Air Force found out that he was giving airplanes to the Thais and had a fit over it and stopped it, is what I'm going to guess. So that left 7 airplanes in limbo, and we don't know what happened to the 7th.
And I guess at the time, describe the weather a little bit. I know you did when you spoke earlier, but for the camera, as far as what y'all saw when you arrived and kind of the weather at the time before you stole the first.
Hot and wet.
You did a little about that.
Well, the monsoon is 6 months and the dry is 6 months. And monsoon was January to June, I think, anyway. It had rained about 10 inches the night before we got there. And so when we showed up to take to...
Which, by the way, was not a big rain.
No, that wasn't a big rain. That's just sort of tamada, as they say in Thai. That means general rain. And, 8 to 12 is fill of rice paddies. And it's every day. Nearly, you can set your clock. So anyway, we saw that they were underwater. And Jack, we didn't think anything about not flying them. We thought, how do we get them out of the damn water? So he talked to Charlie Day, Chief Master Sergeant Day, and I asked him if he could get them out. Can you get them out? And long story short, yeah, if I find me a tow bar and a tug of some kind or a truck, I'll start pulling them out. That's what happened. So we went back, I think, the next day, and he had 2 of them out on the grass. And that's the 683 and 332. And so...
And the airplanes were parked nose to tail in the ditch. And so the order that they came out was the first one in nose to tail and the second one nose to tail. But there was no cherry picking and done.
Yeah.
Next one up, come out.
So he was leading with 332, and I had 683, and Sandy 1 and 2 taxied out.
And then you went back in the C-12 and got the last 2.
Yeah, they took us back.
Next day.
Next day.
665 and 606.
606,
right?
yeah.
But before that, can you describe, and I know y'all have spoken with it when you spoke earlier, because your parachute was wet, and so describe that scenario as far as what you had to do.
Let's tell
Well,
the story.
The canopy was open. When the Vietnamese got out, they just got out. And they left it open. They didn't figure that, they didn't care what happened to the airplanes. They were home. Go ahead.
Not only did everything that I had told him about we were going to fly around the traffic pattern and check each other out, and we were going to read the checklist and all of that other stuff.
By the book.
By the book. I had to tell him that his parachute wouldn't work, and he's going to have to put a pin in the seat so he would not inadvertently eject himself.
Yeah, that's true.
And describe that. Describe why.
Okay.
Well, it's a little hard to believe to start with, but because in NKP, the canopy's closed after the crew chief does a post-flight and oil, water, or gas and everything, and wipes everything down inside, closes it up, and, standard maintenance. Not here. They got out of the airplane and walked. That's you, big boy. So, canopy open, rain in, soak the seat. I reach in and touch the seat and push down, and the water was just like coming up. I mean, it was, coming up between the fingers like you would if you pressed on anything. It's really soaking wet. This ain't gonna work because silk don't work too well opening and when it's soaking wet, especially after you sit on it for a while and pack it down. So I didn't care if I'm sitting on wet seats. That's fine. I mean, the way we were doing things, we could do anything. So anyway, we decided, like Jack says, we're going to fly with the pin in the seat. And there's a little more to it than all that for me. I didn't know if the guns were loaded or not. And I didn't know, I'd forgotten about how to safety the guns with either a circuit breaker or a switch or something. And also I said, hey, don't get your finger on the trigger. We might blow somebody up here, So there's a lot of little things like that in the flaps. We talked about that, and we talked about how to let it idle and warm up and get the needles in the green and all that, or what we thought was a green. But the A-1 is a forgiving type airplane once you get it cranked up, and it wants to go. It just wants to go. And the good thing is, with everything pushed forward, the mixture, the prop, and the throttle, you're going to go. That's it. And you don't have to worry about where to set something too much. So when he released brakes and started down the runway, it was rolling. So.
And a heavy right rudder to keep it from torque steering, right?
Well, for him, because he had a small rudder, and the H model is a smaller rudder. Until you get up enough wind surface going across it, you don't really have too much control. And always in the A1, H and J, when you get off the ground, there is so much torque in that engine, it wants to roll the airplane around the engine. And that's why you got to control it with that rudder.
One of the things in the syllabus of checking out a new A1 pilot is take him up to about 10,000 feet. They're all jet pilots, and they think that rudder pedals is a place to rest your feet. And they never use rudder pedals other than steering of the nose wheel on the ground while they're taxiing. And so you take them up to about 10,000 feet and tell them to put their feet on the floor and pull the nose up to about 25 or 30 degrees above the horizon and push everything full cob, full bore, and not stop the airplane. Just watch, see what it does. And do a great big barrel roll around that engine. And then you'd say to them, okay, now what the rudder keeps from happening is that on final approach, as you turn final and you're overshooting. So we were now start practicing the use of rudder.
And so how much time passed from so-called stealing the first two A1s to the second to the last two? Was it immediately or just one day? Just
One day.
And then the story of General Hope, how they ended up back in the United States.
Well, we talked about that earlier. Go ahead, Jay.
No, I wasn't going to say anything about it. You know, we didn't know. I didn't know how they got back to the United States, and Roger didn't either. Ken found somebody that
he got the colonel or somebody, and they wrote the whole letter about all the things that happened, and he gave it to me, and I went over it a few times and turned it into a briefing scenario so I could read what the DO Adjust Mag did to help General Adderholt get the planes back.
So at the time, you did not know they were coming back to the United States.
No, we don't.
When did the two of you find out that those 4 aircraft were here in the United States?
I don't remember exactly.
I found out about 665 about 3 years ago.
That's about when it got restored and taken back to Tennessee Museum of Aviation.
I got called from Santa Monica Air Museum, like I was saying earlier, from the owner of 606. And he had tracked me down, trying to find out the history and all that. And
when was that?
It was about 10 years ago. And so I don't know, maybe longer than that.
So you got a surprise call nearly 30 years after you got those planes out, and somebody said, oh, by the way, I've got that airplane.
He said, I got something you might be interested in looking at. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, tail number 606, A-1 Skyraider. They say you flew it out of Utapao to Takli. And I said, well, and I had to think a minute. And I said, yeah, that's probably right. He said, well, I got it here on this ramp. I bought it or whatever. The Santa Monica Air Museum. And I said, well, okay. He said, if you want to come see it, come on out here. I'll show you around. I said, all right. So I got a flight out of Austin to L.A., a car from L.A. down to Santa Monica, walked into their museum and shook hands and talked to him, and he walked me outside. He had a T-28 also, and then the A-1 was sitting there. First time I'd seen it since I stole it.
2008, you think? Maybe
I don't even remember. I don't even remember. I tell you how you can find out when he last had it, because I saw it just before he sold it or got rid of it or traded it or whatever he did. They pulled some strings. Ken probably knows. He did some fancy footwork with a C-123 for somebody to do this, to do that, and 606. I may have just come here. This may have been the second owner, but might have gone somewhere else.
And the story's amazing. Is there anything else y'all want to include on here that we need to know?
Well, if this story is primarily about stealing the 4 A1s, that's probably pretty much
about
it.
all of you.
Well, there's a lot of stories that he's got about, and there's a lot of story stuff that I got when you wanted me to describe my Air Force career and getting into it.
Right now.
Well, no, he might need to head out here or something,
I do have a quick question for Jack. When you were in your presentation earlier, you talked about the 6 major bases to be allowed to be built. Where were they? Those locations?
The bases you built.
Utapao,
Okay.
Korat, Takli, Udorn, Uban. I don't remember another one, Jack. NKP. Sorry. You get all those?
What was that second one after?
Utapao, Karat, Takli, Udorn, Uban, and NKP for Nakhon Phanom. All built by the U.S. government.
All full up U.S. Air Force bases.
Yeah. You know, it's already 2:30 or 2:15, so if Jack wants to head back, I can finish my stuff up about where I was and what I did and all, but you got questions for Jack, is what you need to do.
There was just one last question as far as whatever direction we will go with this. If you want to describe your faith, I know Roger talks about that a lot as far as knowing Jesus Christ and how you prayed, and he said I prayed every time you went up in the. If y'all want to describe that and how that meant to you when you were there and were so far away from home, and what did you lean on? What was your inspiration being so far away from home?
When I was hunting trucks on the trail at night, every shot fired at us, you could see because of the tracers. Actually, 1 out of every 7 shots fired at us, you could see because of the tracers. And the hardest time for me was when you got up at altitude and you're heading out to wherever you're going to work. First thing you do is tune in your frequency you're going to be working on and listen to the guy that you're going to be replacing, see what's going on. And you'd hear either the flare ship or the fact said, "Oh my God, there's 4 guns shooting at you from here," and all that. And you could see tracers 90 miles away at night. It was clear. And the hardest time for me was watching those tracers as I got closer and closer and closer to him, because I knew he was aggravating them. And when I got down there, they're going to be
really
mad.
Pissed off.
They were going to be mad when I got there. And getting shot at didn't bother me much, I didn't think. But I got on a run of truck kills. And for 47 consecutive missions, I had at least 1 truck kill. And on some missions, I had a lot more than that, but at least 1. Oh, the facts just love me. Oh, hey, that's Drummond. I want him. I'll take Drummond. Man, he'll kill these trucks. And so I'm getting ready to go out that night. It would be my 48th mission. And I can't make myself go out the door. We lived in a little trailer. We didn't have enough free space any bigger than this table here. My bed was here, and I could reach over to open the door from my bed. It was so small. I kept it dark because I'd sleep during the daytime. But I could not make myself go out that door. And I sat down at my little desk and had a Bible. And I took that Bible and turned it loose. And it opened up. To the 23rd Psalm. And I had no doubt that I was protected. So I jumped up and went out that door. And I never had another problem going out that door.
That's right.
I probably never had another problem going out that door because every day I read the 23rd Psalm. Till this day, every day I read the 23rd Psalm. To me, it very simply encapsulates what your faith does for you. Period. And You know it with my head. He maketh me to lie down in still, beside the still waters. You protect me from my enemies.
Amen. And he did that.
We're both here.
You're both here.
Yeah.
You're survivors.
I never had a doubt after that day. Never. You know, when I got over in Laos, you know, the Laos are all Buddhists, and one of the things every one of them would wear a Buddha around their neck, and you had to get special Buddhas. You wouldn't get just common Buddha. You wouldn't get one off the market on the street. You'd have to get one blessed by the high Buddha at the temple and stuff like that. Well, as an American, I kind of stood out. You know, I was half a head, they came to about my shoulder or a little above in height, so I stood out that way. They wanted me to have a Buddha of all Buddhas. And I was not going to say to them, I'm not going to wear a Buddha. Of course I'm going to wear a Buddha. You want me to wear a Buddha? Let's go get her, baby. Let's get us a Buddha. But I bought me a cross to wear with it. And that was fine with them. I didn't care. So they took me down to some temple, and some guy chanted over my Buddha and all that other stuff. And it worked. You know, I got back just fine.
Here I am.
They were all over those Buddhas, baby. You got to have one. You can't go flying without a Buddha.
Mm.
Some of the little Laos would fly with the Buddha in their mouth. Evidently, that gave them extra protection. It made it hard to understand on the radio, but
I'd be afraid I'd swallow it.
yeah, spit it out and talk.
Is there anything you want to describe once you got home, once the war was over? And
Yeah, there is. You know, we come rumbling in home, hit Travis Air Force Base, and some nice female sergeant says, for those of you that are going over to San Francisco International to catch an airplane, don't wear a uniform. And so you go over there dressed in civilian clothes, and the terminal is full of folks protesting the war and all that other stuff. And, you know, we'd lost the war. Why are we protesting it? We lost the damn thing. Let's move on. But when I couldn't even wear the uniform of the military of my country, that bothered me just a lot.
And when did you get married? What year?
I got married 1957. I got married again in 1982.
And how many children? Because I know some of your family are here today.
Yeah, I had my daughter from my first marriage was here with their daughter, my granddaughter. And I had 2 grandchildren from my second marriage here today.
You had a lot of support today. And your
Yeah.
brother's here.
Huh?
Your brother, too.
Yeah, well, he's my wingman.
Oh.
This is the first time we graduated to a powered chair. We have been working with a manual wheelchair, and he's had to push my butt around, and he said, I ain't doing that anymore. No, he didn't. He's very helpful to me. I couldn't travel without him.
And what was your career after?
Do what?
Your career after the war?
Your military service.
Your military
I worked for the state of Texas for 4 years, writing our strategic plan. And then I went into commercial real estate as a commercial real estate broker. And after 8 years of that, I finally made enough money I didn't have to do it anymore. And my wife and I started a company that managed professional associations, real estate associations. We put on events for them and all that stuff.
How many years did you do that?
20. Till I quit. That was a good career. I enjoyed that too.
Any final thoughts that you want to leave?
Final thoughts about Air Force?
Or your life, or your faith, or anything?
Pretty open. Anything you want to say?
Anything.
Well, I don't have any big summary statement to make. I lost my wife last July. And I'm really thankful for the support of the grandkids that I continue to get.
Right.
I have a granddaughter who I'm at an assisted living center. I have a granddaughter who comes every Wednesday night and has supper with me.
Oh,
I have a granddaughter every Friday night who comes and has supper with me. And I had my daughter comes every Saturday night and has dinner with me. So I get a lot of support.
I think you have a long lost friend you hadn't seen in a long time too.
Yeah. And by the way, there's a guy here today that I do all 20 years I was doing those associations. He's a building engineer. Your daddy was a B-17 pilot, World War II. And he's finally got a really good job, making a lot of money. And he's decided to spend some of his money on flying in airplanes. So he's hiring rides, and he's heard that I was going to be here today, and so he drove up from Austin to hear me talk today. And then he said, well, while I'm there, I think I'll get a ride in the P-51. And I said, Greg, you don't want to ride in the P-51. That'd be like spam in a can back there. You want to ride in the right seat of a two-seat Skyraider. That way you'll watch them manipulate the engine and the controls, and you'll feel like that you're at home. And so he's probably getting a ride right now. I really don't have any big summary statements. I wouldn't change much about my life. Not much at all. General Adder Holt was a big influence on my life. I visited with him every year until he passed away, and I think it was 2010. He just was a special person in my life, and stayed that way, and wanted to. I was the first person he called when his wife passed, and I was honored by that. But he's a hard-headed little son of a bitch.
But you know, everybody I've ever heard talk about him wouldn't change a thing. They would all go work for him again right now.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, there was about 10 or 12 of us guys that were called, behind our backs, people called us Heine's boys, because some group of us worked for him in every assignment. It's a fellow by the name of Dick Secord. Dick worked for him in nearly every assignment. Heine said about Dick Secord, he said, he is the meanest guy I know, but he's the smartest guy I know. So I want him on my side. But there's about maybe 8 or 10 of us, but there'd be 4 or 5 of us working for him all the time. Even after he retired, he thought that some of us worked for him when we didn't work for him anymore. The guys that lived out at Fort Walton Beach where he lived, he called them all the time wanting them to do things. But General, I got this job. I can't go to Russia.
Yeah, that's right. Well, my name is Roger Youngblood. I was born August the 4th, 1944. Born in Taylor, Texas. And my mother was a nurse, and my father was a grocery store manager. He passed away when I was fairly young, and my mother raised me as a nurse, working 2 jobs. I think I was always destined to be in the military and fly because when I was in the 2nd grade, my 2nd grade teacher called my mother one day and she said, "Has Roger ever flown in an airplane?" And my mother kind of laughed because we wouldn't even have the money to get in an airplane. She said, "No, why?" She said, "Well," she said, "we had show and tell today, and in the 2nd grade, Roger got up in front of the class and told how he got in an airplane, talked to the pilot. They went up flying, and he was looking out the window at all the houses and the trees." And she said, the old proverbial, you could have heard a pin drop in that class because everybody was just wide-eyed and staring straight at your son. And he told them everything about that airplane, how it flew, how it did this and that, what the sound was and everything. And he sat down and there really wasn't anything left to show and tell after he told that story. So it was so, now the thing to remember is this was Miss Thompson in my 2nd grade class at 12th Street School. She thought it was so real that she called my mother to confirm, has he been in an airplane or not? So anyway, what I'm trying to say is I had a tendency for flying and feelings and all that, but I also had something for military. When I was in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, I was always organizing guys and people on my street, both boys and girls, and we were marching up and down the street playing Army. We would always play Army. We would find broom handles long enough for guns. We'd find this and that. And it was just a situation where the regimentation and organization and things like that, it just seemed to be coming out in me. And then when I got into school and I was playing sports, I liked the group activities where everybody's doing the same thing. We're all under one coach, and it just seemed to go that way. So I really did take to sports like football and basketball and things like that.
Where did you get your interest from?
I don't really know, other than I was a good athlete. I knew that. I wasn't much good at books. It didn't interest me to sit and read. I just was so interested in Pee Wee baseball when I was 5 years old and 6 years old. And now, being born in August, you're set back 1 year, or not, you're set forward 1 year in Little League Baseball. So you got to play when you were 12 years old all the way through that summer season. And there's a lot of records in the baseball and football and all. If y'all want to go into that sometime, we can get into that. But as I was getting out of college,
and where did you go to college?
I'm sorry, let me back up. As I was getting out of high school, the coach at the nearby town got hired by Abilene Christian University to be the line coach. And I had played against him, and we had beat him and all. And I don't know how they knew that my family were members of the Church of Christ, but that's what Abilene Christian is. So anyway, he comes over to see my coach and says, we're ready to offer Roger a scholarship to Abilene Christian. And so Mother said, that's exactly where you're going to go, obviously. So that's where I wound up going. So 4 years there, I played football, I played baseball.
Where did you go to high school?
Taylor High School, yeah. So out of Taylor High School, went to Abilene Christian, and out of Abilene Christian, the war was going on, and it wasn't long till I was drafted into the Army. So I got this letter that said, you need to be at the post office in Taylor, Texas, and they gave a 30-day date and to catch the bus to go to Fort Polk or somewhere to be inducted into the military. And he said the reason you're given 30 days is to get your personal affairs in order and things like that. Well, I didn't know too much about the draft, and I didn't know anything about the military, although it interested me.
And
so
how did it interest you?
Because I like military. I said, oh man, this, and of course the Vietnam War was starting to roll. This was 68. And so I went to the post office, and in those days the recruiting offices were all up on the second floor. And there they were, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army. So I took the letter and went to the Army first and said, yes sir, that's right. Said, you got maybe 25 days now, you need to be back here to catch the bus. And you'll be a second lieutenant and you make this amount. I went to the Navy, said, yep, you're a second lieutenant and you make that, but you're in the Army. I went to Marines, hey, you're in the Army and you make this amount. And so all the second lieutenants made the same amount. Money I'm talking about. So when I went into the Air Force, that recruiter said, yeah, you're going to do that unless you can qualify to be a pilot, and then we're going to pay you a little extra. And I said, what? Say that again? And he told me that they would pay their pilots extra to fly. I said, well, what do I need to do to get into the pilot training? He said, you have to pass some tests. I said, well, let's see them. So he gave me some tests, and I spent about 3 hours taking tests that afternoon and gave them back to him. And I said, when will you know? And he said, well, I'll get all these tests graded, and then we'll see what happens. Well, about 3 or 4 days prior to the 30 days being up and me having to go with the Army bus, he calls my mother and says he did exceptionally well on his aeronautical tests and all, and that we want to get him in the Air Force. And so mother said, okay, and can you do it? And he said, I'm working on it. Well, the next day he called and said, okay, he's now in the Air Force and he needs to come see me. So I went to see him and we talked and all, and he said, you're going to go down to Medina Air Force Base at Lackland and you're going to go through officer training school. And so that's what I did. I shipped out. My mother drove me down to San Antonio. Just, you know, here's the mother driving in all the traffic right into San Antonio. Of course, it wasn't quite as bad then as it is now. But she took me into Lackland, and she was there when about 25 of us were in a room, and the sergeant came in, raised your right hand, and I was sworn in. February the 18th, 1968. So she left, and I got on the bus with the rest of them, and we went across the 410 loop around San Antonio, and I was over at Medina Air Force Base. And so at Medina, it was specifically designed for officer training school. That's all they did. They graduated a class every month and a half, 6 weeks. So you were a 90-day wonder, or 3 months, you know, and you come out as a second lieutenant. And I really enjoyed just the feel of the military. I enjoyed the dressing up. I enjoyed the discipline. I enjoyed the marching and everything. And I just, you know, I enjoyed it. So I graduated, and I got an assignment to Reese Air Force Base pilot training, and I was in 6907. So I got out there, and for the first time, people from all over the country that were assigned to that class, we all met as a class. And there was about, 70, 75 of us, because the classes were pretty big back then as we were trying to fill requirements for Vietnam. And then it's kind of like the pyramid. You keep going from a lot of people to fewer people to whatever, and the Air Force is that way. So the more we climbed up the ladder to be pilot training, and now we're just talking about pilots. You're getting fewer and better and fewer and better. So you're into a fraternity that requires you to have a degree, college degree, to become an officer. And you have to be an officer to be a pilot. And so that's just what I was trying to talk about. So I went through a year there, and I was doing pretty good. I really adapted to flying, and I enjoyed it, and went through the T-41, the T-37, and the T-38. And I wound up, I think, graduating in the top 10 or 15 in the class. But when our cycle of assignments came down, and there was, I think, 6 UPT bases in the States at that time, and they would graduate 3 every 90 days or so. and it would just keep rolling. And there was a lot of classes at Reese. We were not the only class. So they came down and said, you know, you got 2 F-4s and 1 A-1. Well, I didn't, you know, they were gone nearly immediately, but my student squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Howie Pearson, he had just returned from a C-123 tour in Vietnam, flying the C-123K model, which is 2 recip engines and 2 jet engines on the same airplane. And he said, well, yeah, he said, I want you to know that you may think this is hauling trash and stuff around, but he said the experience that you're going to get will far outdistance any of these other things that these guys get, because they're going to be stuck in the right seat. You'll be there 3 months in transition to be the commander of the aircraft in the left seat, and on and on and on. So I really believed him, because it's just like the coaches were mentors, my commanders were mentors, and I was just feeling the burn, so to speak, and I said, all right, let's go. So I took that assignment, and I went to the training class at Hurlburt Field in 123s. And then I was assigned to Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in the 19th Special Operations Squadron in Saigon. And so from the time I got there, I knew that I wanted to fly A-1s. And so within a few days, I went over to the Military Personnel Center, and I told the man I wanted to volunteer for a consecutive overseas tour. And I guess that wasn't too often that happened, because he was a little surprised. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, well, I want to fly the A-1 Skyraider, which perplexed him again, because most guys that get cargo assignments, they want to fly F-4s, F-105s, some fast jet. I said, look, I said, I can always fly a jet. But I said, this is the last recip fighter that's available in our Air Force, and I want to fly it. And so he said, okay. So he put in my paperwork, and within 30 days of me getting to Vietnam, I had my follow-on assignment to NKP and A-1s. So I did exactly what that student squadron commander said. I volunteered to fly as often as I could. Somebody's sick, I said, hey, I can go, I can do this. Well, I got a lot of experience, just landing and taking off and all that. So as soon as my tour was up, I went over to, I went back to Hurlburt, now this time, to check out in the A-1. And they were a little surprised to see an A-1 pilot, a C-123K pilot show up to transition to A-1s, but they understood the situation was that I was going back for my second tour, and I got my choice. So I checked out in the A-1 and went over to the Philippines for jungle survival school, and that was about a 2-week period. It was interesting, and there's a lot of stories there about being in the POW camp and how they try to prepare you for your Southeast Asia environment in Vietnam in case you become a POW. Anyway, I got up to NKP, and I just loved the squadron. It had a great mission. We were doing a lot of close air support for the Army and all, and we were helping out the indigenous folks in Laos and different places. And we were sitting search and rescue, SAR alert. And so I kept pushing for that to get on to the SAR team. And finally my name came up, and I started out flying wingman in the SARs. And over the year, we had a number of SARs, and some I got on, some I didn't. But the main one that I enjoyed, well, not the main one, but one of them I enjoyed, was Gunfighter 82, Alpha and Bravo, which you can read about and hear about and all that. So anyway, when my tour there was about to end, General Adderholt had come up and talked to the wing commander and said, look, tell all the guys in the A-1 squadron that if they want to come back and be T-28 instructors, I need them, because they obviously got attack training and they're flying recips and this and that. So when I heard that, the assignments that we'd been getting were terrible. They were like 141s, plow back into the ATC, T-38 training, or T-37 or whatever. So I said, yeah, I don't need any of that. My whole career came down to a number of what I call why in the road type things, and I would go this way or that way, and it just seems like every decision I made was very successful for me. I did not lead a normal Air Force life. I didn't go to the Air Force Academy. I didn't graduate first in my class, and now I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I got the C-123K model. and on and on and on. And after flying the 123, I had the experience that I was promised, and I got into the love of my life flying the A-1. And out of that came another Y in the road. Instead of going back and leading a normal Air Force officer's life, I went to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, where I was a one-year course in the Thai language. And I found that I had some kind of ability to listen to the Thai speak and to pick up on the rolling tone marks of each word, which exactly spells out what they're talking about. I think there's about 42 letters in the alphabet, and there's 5 tone marks. But when I was listening to the teachers and all, I seemed to pick up at least a lot faster than my other schoolmates. And some of them were having real difficulty, and I just seemed to, I don't know, I just understood language. And I never thought I would. I didn't think it was going to come easy for me, but Thai language anyway, maybe some other language wouldn't, but Thai language came pretty easy. So I graduated from there, and I went back to JUSMAG, Joint U.S. Military Advisory Group, and walked in to see General Adderholt. And back up one, after I got out of DLI, I went to T-28 training and got checked out in that. So now I'm over there as a T-28 qualified instructor. And General Adderholt showed me a picture of an AU-23 Stoll Porter, nicknamed Peacemaker. And he said, we're going to be giving 13 of these to the Thai Air Force, and I really want you to go up to the second wing and be their advisor. Get checked out up there with, we got a couple of American IPs that flew it. They're going to check you out, and then you're going to work with that squadron. I said, okay, that's fine, whatever. You know, I had known Adderholt. He had been good to me, so I did exactly, you know, I knew he was looking out for my best interest. So actually, I was flying in about 4 or 5 airplanes at the same time. I got qualified to fly the C-47 from Bangkok to Saigon on what they call the embassy run. And they'd take things over to Saigon, the embassy needed, and then the embassy would send stuff back. That was every Sunday, so I was qualified in the C-47, the AU-23, the AU-24, the T-28, and then I flew a few missions in the back seat of the OB-10. So it was an interesting career. I really enjoyed working with the Thais. Many of the Thai pilots invited me over to dinner at their house. And it wasn't because they wanted to check me out on Thai food. It was because they wanted me to speak English to their children. And we'd sit around the table and take this is a plate, this is a fork, this is a knife. And their children would try to catch on and all. And that was all very interesting. And I enjoyed that. So as my career in the AU-23 and with the Thais was percolating along, things were getting worse and worse in Cambodia. And the Thai general that I worked for was getting very worried. They have intel just like we have CIA. So we talked, and he wanted to know what was going to happen. And at that time, we were still strong in South Vietnam, and we were supporting the South Vietnamese, although the Vietnamization process was going on, and we had turned over a lot of airplanes to the South Vietnamese Air Force. So I said, well, I'll keep you informed. I'll see if I can find out. And of course, the scuttlebutt between me and JUSMAG headquarters and all, and General Adderholt was that just keep plowing along. If we need you, we're going to call you. So it wasn't long until my good friend Jack Drummond was involved in the Cambodia evacuation. And one thing led to another till he told me that he said, hey, I need you to come down here with your porter because I need you to take me to a little place called Trot. So I did, and I took him down to Trot, or I took him over Trot. We never landed with him there. But he looked at it, and then he sent a Raven FAC down from Laos to get in the right seat because he wanted to put a FAC down at Trot so he could talk to the helicopters and the O-1s and all that were going to be eventually coming in. So on 29 April, Saigon fell, and everybody started scrambling to try to get out of there. And there was no real ops plan like there'd been in Cambodia. The ambassador voted against that as an indication that we were signaling defeat. But had he gone ahead with it and let General Adderholt exercise the ops plan to evac, well, then we would have saved a lot more people. So anyway, people started coming out, and I would go into trot and back and forth, and then Jack called me and said, look, General Adderholt's got 11 A1s down here duty pound now, and he wants me to get them out, and I want to know if you'll help me. And I said, you dang right I will. I said, to get back into the A1 again was like a dream come true. It had been 3 years for me. I didn't know it had been 6 years for him, but that's what I found out later. But anyway, so we went down there, and I looked around, and we found the airplanes were sitting in a ditch next to the taxiway, all 11 of them, and they were underwater due to the fact that it was a monsoon season. So we got 2 towed out, and the next morning we went back, and it was an E model and an H model. And so I got the E model, and he got the H model, and we got them cranked up, and it was just the sweetest sound you'd ever hear to hear that A1 crank. We taxied out past 2 Jolly Greens and out the end of the runway, and because it had rained so much the night before, we left the ejection seat pins in, so we wasn't going to try to eject with a wet parachute. And we had no checklist. We had no 781 paperwork on the airplane. We didn't know if they'd been written up for maintenance or not or what, because there was just nothing there. So Jack took off first, and I took off second, joined up on him, and we flew to Takli, and we gave those to the Thais, and then the C-12 Army airplane followed us up there and landed behind us, picked us up, and brought us back. We talked about how we were going to land and what settings to use and this and that on the way up there, which was kind of funny because the C-12 pilot was on our frequency and in case we needed to talk to him. And he commented on the way back that he hadn't heard about 2 pilots talking over how they were going to fly their airplane after they were airborne. So it was just kind of, it was one of those things. I mean, I never even thought about it. I really didn't. I just said, hey, I've flown this airplane before. In fact, I had called down to JustMag and told him, I said, hey, I'm going to fly this A1 with Drummond. I said, just know it's been 3 years, but I'm good to go. And he said, Youngblood, he said, do you ever ride a bicycle? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, okay, then get down there and get those A1s out of there, meaning, you don't forget how to fly an A1. And that's so true. So long story short, we went back down the second day to get 2 more. And it's 2 more H models. And they had stopped us on the ramp and was questioning our currency. And when we finally told them that, hey, they asked us, when were you current in flying this airplane? And we said yesterday. That kind of threw them for a loop. And the guy got back in his car, Colonel Austin, I think it was, and then he left. So we flew these 2 out. And then when we got done with that and came back to Don Muang, we had orders from Adderholt to stop and desist from that he had been ordered to not steal any more A1s. So time passed that we worked with General Adderholt that Takli had 4 A1s and he had a plan to get them back to the States, which he did. And
Which you didn't know about.
No, I didn't. And he was doing that. Like I say, The Art of the Deal, he wrote that book very long ago. So he got them all the way down to the port of Bangkok and on a Russian trawler, and they wound up in Los Angeles somewhere. So he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, well, I'd like to fly A7s, and because guys were getting terrible assignments out of Southeast Asia, if they were the ones that were left. So about 2 weeks later, he called and he said, I think I got you your A7, and about a week later, I got a message from NPC, Military Personnel Center, saying I was assigned to Davis-Monthan in the A7. So that's where I showed up. And just a thing along the way, I went out to Florida and I met some of the Vietnamese refugees, and I talked to an A1 pilot out there, and I asked him if he wanted to get out of there and go with me. He could come live with me for as long as he wanted. And he said he did. And so I packed him up and we went out to Tucson, and he lived with me for a year, and I got him a job at HEB, and I got him a Bank of America checking account, and I got him into English language school with other Vietnamese.
And what was his name?
Tom Van Tron. And then after about a year or so, he decides to go to Minnesota with some of his buddies, which was great. So we cashed him out at the bank, and he was on his way. I was in the A7 there about a year, and the A10 was coming online, and all the A7s were going to be moved to Myrtle Beach. So I got sent to Myrtle Beach. I was actually asked, do you want to go to Myrtle Beach or Alexandria, Louisiana? And I said, well, I think I'll go to Myrtle Beach. So I did. I flew A-7s there in the 353rd Squadron for a couple of years until finally the 353rd was the last squadron to transition to the A-10, and A-10s were coming to Myrtle Beach. One thing I did like about the A-7 was that it had a search and rescue mission, and I got to get into that and help them with a little bit of the design that I had from the A-1, and that was good. I enjoyed that. And then when I transitioned to the A-10, they have a search and rescue mission in the A-10, and I got to help them rewrite the book on that to a point. And I had not gotten out of flying or been assigned anything other than flying my whole life. That's another crazy thing that people didn't understand. I'd never taken a tour up at headquarters at TAC. I'd never taken a tour at PACAF, no desk job. Every time something came up, said, hey, you're number one on the list. If you want it, you can have it. I said, no, I don't want it. I said, I'm here to fly, so find me a flying job. So after that, I was in A-10s at Myrtle Beach, and the wing commander had gotten a good rating on his IG report and all, and he got selected to be in charge of the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron out at Nellis. So he took one guy out of each of the three squadrons, and I happened to be the guy he selected out of the 353rd to go with him to Nellis. So I got to do some really interesting work, because in that squadron was A-10s, F-4s, F-15s, and F-16s. And so I flew the A-10 out there doing some testing and all for the A-10 and bringing online some things, and to include the lantern system, which is the low altitude terrain infrared following at night, which is another story altogether. If you ever have time to sit down and talk about that, it's just, it was cosmic, state of the art, being able to fly the A-10 and the F-16 at night down to say 300 feet with no illumination, because it had FLIR and a lot of good capabilities for attacking tanks or whatever at night. So after that, the wing commander or a colonel there at Nellis got assigned back to Myrtle Beach. And he said, I want to take Youngblood and two other guys with me. So I got to go back to Myrtle Beach, but this time it was in the A-10. So I did two tours at Myrtle Beach, one in the A-7, one in the A-10. And a single tour is a dream job, but to get to do it twice is just unheard of in TAC or Air Force at that time. So I wound up doing that, and then I got an assignment out there that said, you're not going to get out of this. We're going to send you to Korea as a ops officer in the 604th Direct Air Support Squadron, which was a DAS. And we were supporting the Army General 2-star or maybe 3-star there at Red Cloud. And so I spent 2 years doing that, and that was my 20th year, and I was getting ready to retire, and I got the phone call from MPC. And you always worry about these phone calls when they lead off by saying, Youngblood, you're the only person in the U.S. Air Force computer that is ready for this job, can do this job. I said, well, I think I've heard this story before. What is it? And she said, well, we had a person in Thai language school that didn't make it, and we have to fill that slot within 3 months. And you're the only one that has a fighter pilot AFSC and has been to Thai language school. So we would like you to offer you that job. And I said, well, what's in it for me? And said, well, you have to go for 1 year while we put somebody else in the language school. I said, well, what else? They said, well, you can stay 4 years if you want to, up to 4 years. I said, well, that'll put me at 24 years in, and that's 60% retirement, which is not bad. And then throw me back in the briar patch into Thailand. I speak the language, I love the job, and I'm flying the C-12. I said, okay, I'll do it. So he brought me back from Korea to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington to get checked out in the C-12, and then back over to JustMag. And I spent 4 years over there. And I worked for Ralph Wetterhahn, who wrote the article for the Smithsonian Air and Space magazine in January of '97. About the fall of Saigon, or escape to Utapao is what it's called. So we got to be good friends, and I'm sure that he got interested in that story because I told him about the things that had happened And he was a military writer, history writer, so he did that. So at that point, after those 4 years there, I got out of the Air Force after 24 years, and I retired at the embassy there in Bangkok. Came back home and started a mortgage business and for homes, and then was taking care of my mother, who moved into a nursing home, and I was building gated communities for seniors. And so that's kind of where it all stayed until Ken Holston, who works as a pilot for Delta but is a member of Cavanaugh Air Museum, he got the research in this fall of Saigon, and he wanted to know where Jack Drummond was, the other guy involved in stealing the airplane. So he called me one day and said, "I think I found your Jack Drummond." And I said, "My goodness," because it had been 40 years since I had talked to him or knew anything about him. I didn't know where he was. He lives 40 minutes from me in Round Rock, Texas at a nursing home. So I said, "Can't be." I said, "All right." So I called him up, and sure enough, it was the Jack Drummond, as he says. So we had a good long talk. I went to see him, which was a little emotional the first time I saw him after 40-something years. And this thing seemed to kind of get going to the point that, hey, they're going to have a Warbird show in Tennessee at Sevierville, and would you go up there and talk to those guys about your experience in the A-1s, and we're going to have some A-1 pilots there and all. I said, sure. So I motored over to Tennessee and had a good time, met some good people, and when I got finished there, they had told me there was going to be a big event at Cavanaugh Flight Museum here in Addison, and that I was invited to come and tell them the story about the 4 A-1s. Well, I was able to get Jack Drummond to come up here, as his brother was bringing him. He's totally disabled, in a wheelchair, but he accepted it, and he came with me, and so we put on a good demonstration here the last couple of days, and so I'm open to some questions.
How many missions did you fly?
Well, I don't really remember, but I have 9 combat air medals, and so I think at the time it was 30 missions for 1 air medal. I think might have been 32. I don't know. You can look it up somehow, some way. But I didn't really care. I was always going to the ops counter and saying, "Hey, I'm ready." And I'd go to the squadron even on my days off with my uniform on and ready to go if somebody needed me. What I lost track of, and I just wasn't thinking, is all the missions in the AU-23 I never logged. All those years I was flying the AU-23, so I don't know how many, maybe 1,000 hours, maybe more. And the AU-24, the Cambodian airplane, I never logged any of those missions either. So I got most of the things that counted that were controlled and recorded by the U.S. Air Force, but a lot of stuff that didn't go down. I was lucky in all the things that I did. I was very religious and everything, and then I just knew the good Lord would take care of me. And at the time, my brother was in the Air Force in Greece, and I was in the Air Force in Vietnam, and Mother was, like I said, we'd lost our father, and so she said she's praying every night for both of us, and so we were gone and we were in the Air Force, but we were enjoying what we were doing. And so I spent 24 years and got out with both arms, both legs, and a little mentally deficient, but other than that, I'm here. So next question.
Is there anything you want to add about your faith?
Well, when I was 6 years old, my mother always sang in the house all the time. In the Church of Christ, we do not use musical instruments like the Baptists with pianos or organs or anything. So it's just all a cappella as it is described in the Bible. So we would sing in the house, would sing in the car and everything. So when I was 6 or 7, Mother asked one of the elders in the church if I could lead a song. She had been teaching me a song. And he said, sure. Well, the thing was, when I got up in the pulpit area, I couldn't see over the place where the preacher stood or the song. So they got a box, and they put this box behind there that I could stand on. And so I was leading singing, and we were singing the song. And
do you remember the name of the song?
I think it's Sweeter Are the Promises, because we had learned that one. And so, boy, the whole church afterwards just came around shaking my hand, saying what a good job. And I didn't know they were lying, but you know, it made me feel good. So, boy, Mother started teaching me another song and another song. 6 or 7. So by the time I'm 12, I'm leading every other Sunday church service singing. And I just got into it, and she was one of 5 daughters and 4 brothers, big family. And they were all Church of Christ back in the day. And so this was her faith, and it's what I was going to be. And we were in a church in Taylor, Texas. It was about maybe 85, 100 people. And windows were up, and there was no AC, and nobody cared. And they wore their coats and dressed up and went to church and vacation Bible school and all the rest. So I was totally indoctrinated into the church. And then when the possibility of playing football for Abilene Christian, which is a Church of Christ University, came along, Mother, there's no question. I wanted to play baseball. I wanted to go to Texas Tech and play baseball or somewhere. But anyway, so I wound up at Abilene Christian. But this is just another time in my life where you come to a Y in the road, and you go this way, you go that way. And then what does that lead to? That leads to another time in your life when you go this way or that way. And from my early childhood development through high school and into college, and then getting into the Army, but getting out of the Army into the Air Force, that I can just point to too many times when that happened. And selecting a C-123K model instead of some C-141 or something, you know, in my pilot training class. It's just too many times like that. So
being at Vietnam, how did your faith play a part?
Well, the faith didn't waver. The faith was there. And I prayed every morning, and that everything went well, and I prayed every night saying thank you that it went well. So, you know, I believed in so many of the verses that I had learned over the years, and you know, I knew that I had been baptized, and I knew that I understood what the requirements for being a Christian were. So I knew that God would protect me, and if He didn't, it was my time to go. So that was just the way it was. I didn't worry. That burden did not impact my flying, because I volunteered for everything. You know, if they needed somebody to insert somebody up north or fly SAR or whatever, in fact, I thought the SAR mission was like a Christian mission, if you want to know the truth. Mm-hmm. We went up searching and finding people and pulling them out of the weeds and saving their lives and giving them another day. And yeah, that may sound corny to you, but it wasn't corny to me, because we saved a lot of guys. We got a lot. And the U.S. government always, I think throughout history, tried to save its patriots. And it's the same way with SAR. The war came to a stop when somebody got shot down, and we used every asset available to go and rescue that person.
Is there anything that you would like to share and leave?
I have a question before you get there. Once, when the planes, we understand that the 4 aircraft, the A-1s, it was unknown to you that General Adderholt was trying to get them back to the United States.
That's right.
They got back to the United States some years later, you know, sometime later, 75, 76, something like that. Tell us about the first time that you learned one of your aircraft was back in the United States where you were.
Well, I was out of the Air Force,
right,
obviously. And somehow the man that had bought 606, and I'll speak about that one, because I didn't know where 683, the E-model went.
Was that David Talashay?
I don't know, but he owned the Santa Monica Museum, or he had a part ownership in it, and he owned that A-1. So I got a call and said, we have something out here you might be interested in, and we think that you flew this airplane out of Utapao to Takli. And I said, wow, and that kind of blew my mind away. I'd kind of forgotten about all that. And so I said, well, I'd like to see it. They said, come on out. And so I flew out and drove down from L.A. to Santa Monica and walked out the back door onto the lot where they had all their airplanes, and bigger than Dallas. There it said 606. It's painted in, he had it repainted in navy colors the way it was originally. And I didn't mind that, but that's okay. But I got to walk around and touch it and get up and look in it and all the rest. And so it was a moment getting back to it. But I still, until the last year, realized what a story this might all be about getting back those 4 airplanes to the States and all the people that was involved and all the things behind the scenes that General Adderholt did, because Jack Drummond knew him like a father and was telling me and filling me in on things. And for him living 40 minutes from me, I'm going to be over there talking to him a lot more, because we just like to, shoot the bull and talk about Auburn and Alabama games and going back and forth. So anyway, we just it was a moment to knock on the door and see him again. Believe me, after 42 years.
Imagine. And the first time you heard that 3350 fire back up again?
It's been 43 years. I went to Sevierville, Alabama. As a Texan, I think every Texan should go to Tennessee to realize how much they appreciate Texas so they can come back. And I have some thoughts about that, but I won't go into that. But anyway, I got there to the Warbird Museum, and I walked outside, and there it sat, Neil Melton's A-1. And what an unusual man he is. Him and his wife been married, 40-something years. They are quite a pair, but he had the wherewithal to do that museum and the airplane and all, and I went out there, and he told me he was glad to see me. I'd never met him before. We shook hands, talked for a while. He said, "I'm going to crank it up." And I said, "All right." So he got in his uniform and went out there, and I'm standing there, and and my heart actually really started beating kind of crazy like I'm doing. And you're just taking a couple of breaths, and you're watching him, and he starts turning that engine over. And it seems to me now that I've seen that and other 683 cranked by that owner and 606 cranked by these people here. They have to do 16 blades to sort of grease the wheel, so to speak, and then it cranks up. But they can do 10 and then 6, or they can do 4, 4, 4, 4, whatever. It's different. But I only knew 16 blades and put the fire to it. Well, he did 10, and then he did 6 more, and then it cranked up. But that first sound that you get with the rush of that thing as it cranks is just as if you got on a Harley and you kicked the crank down, and you were able to crank up maybe the most powerful engine Harley has. And you've got some souped up cam in there that just has that Harley sound of loping along, And the A1 is so typical, so nearly exactly like that, because you got 2 circular rows of 9 cylinders each. And it's just a huge engine, biggest engine recip that's ever put in a single-seat fighter like the 606. And it's just so powerful. And I enjoyed that feeling. I enjoyed the ability to fly a single-seat fighter in SAR and combat and everything else. And in fact, one of my old IPs used to tell me, and when we'd get over the target area and we'd get our briefing from the FAC, and he'd say, "2, you got all that?" And I'd say, "Yes, sir. 2, got, copy, whatever." He said, "All right, let's let her dance." And here he would go. And I mean, it was just like a dance, a symphony. And it's just like you sitting in your own little Corvette or something, and it's just you and that. Well, it was just me and that A1. And I can't maybe adequately express the sensation of sitting in a single-seat fighter. Maybe the P-51 guys in World War II had the same feeling when they were fighting and doing and all, but when you fly an A-1 down at 100 foot trying to find a survivor, and you're looking out left and right, and you're flying and handling the radios and the weapons and cross-checking your engine instruments and all, it gives you such a feeling of confidence when you come back with a survivor, It's just amazing.
And where do you live now?
I live in just south of Taylor, Texas, on the same land that my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother had. I've taken my mother's home, which was built in '85, and I got a Texas Veterans Land Board loan to renovate it, and I'm renovating that house, and I live there. It's on 5 acres, and I'm taking care of it now. If I can put this ad in, I have 20 acres of beautiful land next to it for sale, with big trees, big oaks, big cedars, and a pond and a storeroom, which I'd like to sell if anybody's interested. I'm covering all the closing costs myself. And we got everything, water, electricity, we got wild hogs, we got a few deer, and we got everything. So it's beautiful. It's in Williamson County, high elevation, no floodplain. So somebody ought to scarf it up.
You need to go ahead and tell him now we're not moving to Texas.
Yeah, well, I might make it worth your while.
God bless Texas, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We saw that billboard coming in.
Yeah.
Any last things?
Well, I'm just,
Did you want to go to
I just think that I was meant to be in the military. I was meant to play sports with a team effort. And I dovetailed in my religion to everything I did. And so back in the day when the coach led the prayer before the game and all that, that's just part of me. And I just feel like that my 24 years was very unordinary, or whatever word you guys are.
Extraordinary is what we like to call it.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it just wasn't the path of a normal pilot in the Air Force. But that led me to be so happy after it's over that I did what I did and got to go from one thing to another. I got to fly the 3 greatest attack airplanes in the U.S. inventory, the A-1, the A-7, and the A-10. And I got to do the same tactics in each one, which is close air support. And you got the guys above 10,000 feet, and you got the guys below 10,000 feet, and I'd rather be below. And I was an IP in every one of those airplanes, and in the A-10, it's such a maneuverable, great airplane that when I become an IP, we were actually cleared down to 100 feet. So you were at 250 to 300 knots at 100 feet, and it's a different world. As we say, you weed out the deadwood. If a guy can't handle it, he starts moving dirt around with the nose of his airplane, and he don't last long. So that's just the way it is. But most of the guys that transitioned from the A-7 were good stick and rudder guys. They knew what they were doing, and they become good A-10 pilots sitting behind a 30-millimeter Gatling gun that was just liquid fire. I mean, it was just put some hurt on you in a heartbeat. So I'm happy about that. I'm happy that this whole thing about the 4 A-1s has come about. I'm happy you all are recording this. I don't know where it'll go. A lot of people, more than you would know, said, you got to write it down. You got to write it down. Don't let it get away. And there's some things that I wanted to record, if I do write it down, that didn't get on the video or audio, maybe. See, like Jack and I sit and talk. And we go through things, maybe it's just little things, like going out and checking the weapons load on your plane and looking for the pins to make sure. The Laotians that were trained at Udon, that was flying the T-28s and Mark 82s, they would pull the wire out of the nose of the bomb, and they would take the propeller and they would crank it down to where it was nearly armed and put it back in. So they could get down much lower. So when they pickled off that Mark 82, that propeller only made about 4 turns and it's armed. And so they could deliver that bomb. If we pickled it 1,000 feet, they were pickling it 500. Well, they got a lot of frag, they got a lot of stuff, but they would stick it in the door of the hooch. And so they figured out how they could pull the arming wire out and crank the prop back. And then, you know, usually you drop a bomb and the arming wire's pulled. Well, it takes a little while for the bomb falling through the wind for the propeller to wind up and it'll arm somewhere below you. And it was meant to be that way, so when you dropped it, it didn't blow up under your wing. They didn't care. They wanted to put it where it was. And the first time I saw that, I was just, what in the world? And this guy who I knew pretty well, he said, hey, I'm getting down there. And he says, when I let go of it, he says, I'm jinking and pulling and doing as much I can, so I'm out of the bomb frag. But he says, I can put it in the door. That was his phrase. So I experienced some things like that, you know, and flying night missions in the AU-23 with the ties, and they were using a night vision scope for the pilot that was on bungee cords. They didn't have any other way to set it up, and this thing's sitting over here in the right guys flying and left guys looking and talking to the gunner, and that they didn't know how to lead. And so that's one thing I was teaching them from 3,000 feet and 30 degrees of bank. If you're going to shoot at something, you got to lead it, because the velocity of the airplane and all was dragging their bullets, and they're shooting behind it, not a straight shot from, so they got to learn how to lead. So we did that. And, just a number of things. And the AU-24 tour with the Cambodians was another significant event that maybe we talk about again sometime. Training the Cambos for a week or two to fly. And I hated to see Cambodia fall, because the Khmer had no mercy on them. They cut their heads off and put all the pilots' heads on stakes outside of the airport so the people could see, the ones they caught. But thanks to Jack Drummond and General Adderholt, there was an ops plan to evacuate all those people. And they were so enthralled about how to get out and still land a punch that when all the T-28s left Pochitong there in Phnom Penh, they loaded up Mark 82s underneath the wings. They took off by themselves. All of them had moved their families the week prior out to Battambang, which was in Cambodia, but it was further to the west towards Thailand. So all the families were out there. They took off and they bombed all the targets where the Khmer Rouge were. They landed at Battambang. They rearmed with Mark 82s. They put their families in the back seat and all that. And they flew back to the target with their families in the back seat. They bombed again, and this time they RTB'd to Thailand. That's the mindset of the people that I got to work with. So it's a lot of stories like that have yet to be told. But, I don't know how many frequent flyer miles you'll have to come to Austin to visit with Jack. But, he lives in a great place, and you can record and do. And this could be an unbelievable book of just more enveloping the history of both him and me and all we've done, but to culminate with which we did, was to steal the 4 airplanes. Because the Thais didn't know when the MiGs were going to be entering Thailand and flying over the base, and said, hey, we're coming to get the spoils. We destroyed South Vietnam. Those airplanes all belong to us. And that's what the Thais were worried about. And that, I think, a little bit of what the U.S. State Department was worried about too. What are we going to do if they attack Thailand? Because they had a treaty. We had a treaty with Thailand. You let us build all these bases there and we'll protect you. So, I don't know.
So the remaining 7 just stayed?
As far as I know, they remained in Thailand, and I don't know who got them or what happened to them. I just don't know.
Take 1. Fast movers in the night.